Welcome everyone to another episode of Revolution Recap. The Revolution crashed out of their first international competition in over a decade with a disastrous 3-0 loss in Mexico City on Wednesday night to Pumas. After winning the first leg 3-0 in Foxborough, the Revolution lost by the same scoreline in regulation and then fell one penalty kick short. The Revs become only the second team in CCL history to blow a 3-goal lead after the first leg in CCL. I'm Greg Johnstone. Joining me today is a new guest. Jamie Rooke of The Last Word on Soccer is joining me today. Jamie, we are really throwing you into the deep end for your debut podcast. Certainly a lot to talk about going to this game. But how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm all good. Thank you, Greg. How are you doing?
I've been better. It's been a rough week for Revs fans after that RSL game. I was hoping we could kind of just cruise through Pumas, maybe lose 1-0, 2-1, give us a little bit of positive momentum going into the international break. But certainly yesterday did not go as well as planned. Jamie, what was your key takeaway from last night's disaster south of the border?
I mean, as you say, there was with a 3-0 advantage, you would hope for, even with a loss on the night, to advance. So I think the key message for me was it rolls over from the RSL game, in fact, is that I've been hearing, whether it be Carlos's fiery interview after the RSL game or the talk of the altitude in Mexico City and the Cavalier cancellations, I think it's just a lot of excuses, to be honest, and without wanting to be too negative, I think, simply put, the team just weren't good enough. And whether, the team that was put out by Bruce, whilst maybe not a great team, I'd like to think should have been good enough to get over the line. So, yeah, my key takeaway is that you can make all these excuses you want about altitude, but you just have to, you can't lose like that in such a high-pressure game, really.
Mm-hmm. And, Pumas came to our stadium and played in the snow and played in the cold, and they had to adjust to their conditions, and we took advantage. It's only fair for us to go there and play in their conditions. And this game was a little bit later, so it wasn't as hot as, a game that would be earlier in the evening would be. This is really compounded game after game with the RSL game. I know a lot of people weren't happy with the snow and the conditions. I don't know what I don't want to say excuses because the press conference yesterday was quite brief. There wasn't really a whole lot said. So I don't want to say they're making more excuses. I think the fans might be more trying to explain what's going on here. But this was a pretty catastrophic failure. And that leads to my key takeaway, which is that, my last key takeaway last week was that the players really deserve a good share of the blame. And I deflected a lot of my criticism off of Bruce Arena because I thought that team should have seen it out. I have a real issue with Bruce Arena this week for this podcast. I thought his tactics weren't that great. We seem to have been playing back a little bit, but we ran out the same starting 11 minus Andrew Farrell. We were getting destroyed on the wide areas. It just seemed like Pumas had cross after cross after cross that was going in. And it seemed pretty early on. It seemed pretty clear to me that John Bell and Omar Gonzalez were, I know they're the only center backs available, but they're just not that quick. They're just not that fast on their feet. And, similar to the Foxborough game, I thought there were some chances that Pumas maybe missed. They probably should have scored a little bit sooner. This game could have been won in regulation, in my opinion. Bruce Arena just didn't make any tactical changes to kind of protect that back line. It just seemed like a game where he was really hoping John Bell and Omar Gonzalez would hold up. And I really think that was just doomed to fail. When Andrew Farrell's in the game, he might get beat here or there, but he's got some recovery speed, whereas Omar Gonzalez and John Bell, to me, they just seem like they're a little too slow. They can't really recover. They're a bit of a sitting duck when someone gets in front of them or gets behind them, I should say. So, Bruce Arena kind of stuck with the diamond formation. Bo and Buksa, I know Buksa had a few chances that really kind of was a good letdown. He had 2 or 3 chances where he really could have gotten that very meaningful away goal. But Gustavo Bo had some long shots and that was really more or less his contribution of the night. He had a couple of decent passes, but he wasn't really that involved in the attack that much. I feel like this was a sit back and let the game come to us game. And I wonder if Bruce Arena would have been a little bit better off maybe playing Maciel instead of Tristison, or Maciel in the central midfield, and maybe you put Tristison kind of on the wing and you kind of have someone occupying those wide spaces, because it just seemed to me that Pumas was just going to go cross after cross after cross with Mozo. I believe that was his name. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. All three of those goals, the first one was a low cross to the near post that beat John Bell. The second one, DeJuan Jones was up a little bit, and they exposed the space behind him, and John Bell got pulled out of position, and Omar Gonzalez couldn't cover over in time. And then the third one, I know it was a shot from Brandon Bye, but it was a cross in that Brandon Bye just couldn't head and clear away. And so that there's more to that play than just the crossing. But, Bye fails to head one out, and they get a shot and it goes in. So I just was very disappointed, I thought, in the tactics from Bruce Arena. And it just seemed like he wasn't really able to adapt for this game. Because as I say, he played his kind of best 11, which kind of implied that maybe they're going to go for that away goal and win it. But as the game went on, it just seemed that the Revs were just letting Pumas kind of take the game to them.
Yeah, I think everything you said is pretty spot on. As you've said, it's a fine balance about where the blame lies. You've got Bruce, who he's never been hugely into tactics and all of that, and you wonder whether he put out the right team. But then at the same time, I think it still comes back to the players, not delivering, as you said, without wanting to pile on the pressure too much. Bell and Omar Gonzalez at centre back just didn't seem. Obviously, they haven't played together, but just didn't seem up for it. They were caught asleep, I'd say, for the first two goals and just got beaten to the ball.
Yeah, and I almost feel bad for them because, as I say, I mean, Omar is great in the air. He's a tall guy. He can head everything away, but he's just not that quick. And John Bell, kind of the same thing. He doesn't strike me as someone who's like really, really fast. And so, neither of those guys have played with the Revs without Andrew Farrell, I believe. I don't think we saw John Bell and Henry Kessler at all last year. I'd have to double check that. But usually Andrew Farrell is there. And kind of, not that he's the, DeJuan Jones or Emma Boateng, but he's got some recovery speed, and John Bell and Omar Gonzalez really don't. So, I felt bad for them. I think this was just doomed to fail, as I say. I have a lot to say. But as you say, even with that lineup, the Revs should have seen him off. Really, really strong odds going into that game for the Revs to advance. Jamie, was there anyone else on the Revs last night that disappointed you or put in a performance that you were disappointed in?
I think it's to come off a 3-0 loss where there was so many enough chances, but there was no goals. I feel like I don't like to be too negative, but there's so many players I could highlight. But I think the centre back pairing are obviously the main two. Traustason gets booked after 15 minutes, seems to be a customary now and then. If I'm not mistaken, he ended up getting dragged at half time for Tommy McNamara, so I'd say that's another one. Traustason, whilst I think he's a good player, it just seems to be happening most games now.
Yeah, and he got pulled last game too against RSL because of the yellow card. He got a yellow card last game too, and last year. So I got fact checked on this. I sent out a tweet that Traustason had 4 games where he got booked last year, but in 2 of those he got 2 yellow cards. So when he gets the first yellow card, usually the second one isn't too far behind. So I don't blame Bruce Arena for trying to get him off, but the Revs seemed a little bit better with Traustason than McNamara on the field. He's just got to stay on the field and not get that yellow. And he got it pretty early too. I think he was just late on attack. He stepped on a foot. Those things happen. But disappointing for him to get a yellow so early in the game, and that might have changed things a little bit. I also do know there was a play of maybe 5 or 10 minutes later where he made a tackle, and I remember the commentators kind of pointed it out like he's on a yellow. He's got to be a little careful because if that's a second too late, the Revs are playing a man down. So. I agree with everything you said there. I don't want to beat up John Bell and Omar Gonzalez too much because I think a lot of people are doing that already online. And as I say, that's obviously not your ideal center back pairing. I do want to talk about Adam Buksa real quick though, because he had. I think a lot of people are going to go back and focus on the play in the 24th minute when DeJuan Jones makes a tackle. They kind of go, it's the 17th minute. DeJuan Jones makes a great tackle. Heel goes on a counterattack. Bo crosses it in for Buksa, and Buksa volleys it wide. That obviously could have ended the game right there. And then later, there was a ball stolen by T-Mac, Tommy McNamara in the 65th minute. Buksa kind of has a clear shot at goal in the 18 box, kind of a look what I found type play. And skies it over the bar. And then on top of that, Buksa did not step up to take the penalty kick, which I think a lot of people are surprised about. Buksa, I thought, has been playing great so far this season. We had a lot of positive things to say about him last week. but I thought he might have probably, in terms of disappointment, not the worst player on the pitch, because I think that might go to the center back pairing, but I thought Buksa was by far the most disappointing performance of the night. Any thoughts on Adam Buksa there?
Yeah, again, there's not a lot more I can add to that. I think, yeah, I was just as confused with the penalty decision. Bruce, I was in the press conference after the game, and Bruce said that the Heel, Jones, and McNamara first three were as expected, and then Leggett and Altidore said they would take one. But it just seems odd to have, you've got this, your striker was top goal scorer last season for the team. He's a DP and he doesn't take one. It seems odd. And then in the game as well, he was wasteful almost, which isn't always the case. He's scored a couple already this season, so yeah, you would hope he would be the one to step up in this big game.
It was weird. Those comments were a little weird to me too, because he asked kind of who was confident to take it and all that, and he said Sebastian Leggett stepped up. I didn't think he looked that confident on TV. Did you? I don't know what you thought, but it looked like he wanted no part of it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was. He was almost shaking walking up to it, and then as soon as he struck it, you just could tell exactly where it was going.
I will say the keeper was playing some head games, so maybe Sebastian Leggett was starting to doubt himself. Maybe the keeper said something that got him going. I think the commentators noted this too, where the keeper was pointing at the right to his right, kind of pointing to the corner of the goal, telling DeJuan Jones to shoot it there, and then jumped the other way. And actually, I went back and I watched the New York City FC playoff game, just the shootout last year, and that's the exact same spot DeJuan put it last year, and he put it perfectly. And so I think that keeper knew DeJuan would do something kind of similarly, and was trying to get in his head, trying to get him to change it last minute. But yeah, I maybe Leggett just kind of had got in his head a little bit. Another thing too, though, I wanted to point out about the NYCFC shootout. The reason I went back and watched it because I was curious if Buksa took a shot last year, and he stepped up second to take it. It wasn't a particularly great penalty. It was low. Sean Johnson went to his left and saved it. It was along the ground. By no means was a great penalty. Buksa's only other penalty that I could find was he took a penalty kick in his first year in New England against TFC where he skied it high, and that was when he had kind of a lot of his struggles. So Adam Buksa in his Revs career, unless I'm missing one and it's not showing up on the MLS website, he is 0 for 2 in penalty kicks. So maybe he knows that in the back of his head, and maybe he did not want to step up. But as you said, Jamie, Bruce Arena said the first three were determined going into the game. So Tommy McNamara, who didn't take a penalty kick last year at New York City FC, didn't. He was one of the three that was determined, which I thought Tommy McNamara stepping up was the most surprising one, and his penalty kick was not that great either. So the penalty kick lineup was very surprising in a number of ways.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, one thing I found very interesting was I was keeping an eye on it as it went on, and it just got more confusing. The first four Pumas penalty takers was their whole back line. So obviously that's something very uncommon. I was keeping track, and the whole four were their back line, till then obviously Denenio, the striker, stepped up and put home the winning one.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't notice it. I had my mind blown by Tommy McNamara stepping up that I didn't even notice Pumas doing that. But yeah, let's get to some positives right now. We've already complained about the center back pairing. We've already complained about Adam Buksa a little bit. Jamie, I don't know if there's a ton of positives you can take away from this game, but who was someone last night that maybe impressed you or played pretty well?
Well, as you said, again, we don't want to be too negative because it's one game at the end of the day, but there are a lot of negatives. But there's two players I'd probably want to point out. The first one, maybe not necessarily a positive, but I thought there was a lot of players just standing around waiting for Heel to pull off his usual magic. And I think whilst he is an amazing player, he can't do it every game. So I almost felt bad for him that so much expectation was on his shoulder and no one else seemed willing to do anything. And then the one player I did think was one of the better performances had to be Brandon Bye. I think as we've seen with him and Jones as the fullbacks going forward, they are very good players. And whilst, we conceded 3 from crosses as well, a couple of them, I still think Bye would be the standout of all the players. I think he looked interested, he looked up for it, he kept fighting going forward and defensively. And so, I'd say Bye and maybe Jones were the players I would point to as the better performers.
Yeah, those were the two guys I had. I had Heel and By. And I had DeJuan Jones here too. Although DeJuan Jones, I think, was quite limited because he wasn't able to get up that much up the field, which is understandable. But I thought Brandon By. A lot of people are going to focus on that third goal where he kind of misheads it a little bit. And as I say, there it just happened to be a Pumas player right there, and he's not able to kind of block that shot that comes back in. He also did have another moment where he misjudged a header in the 48th minute, and the Pumas player kind of has a hard touch and it goes out for a goal kick. But outside of that, Brandon By played pretty well on a night where there was a lot of pressure coming in from Pumas, and there were a lot of plays that, as I say, it looks like they were trying to expose the wings pretty well. And DeJuan Jones and Brandon By, I thought, did pretty admirably to kind of reduce the pressure at times and played pretty well. Brandon By had a handful of good clearances. I'm just going to pull up his number. He had 10 clearances, 9 of them headed. He also had 6 recoveries, was only 1 for 5 on duels. DeJuan Jones had one of the better nights, 15 for 18 passing. He had 1 key pass, 44 touches. I don't see how many clearances. He only had 1 clearance, but he had 5 recoveries and 2 tackles. He was 3 for 5 on duels. So DeJuan Jones, they played pretty well considering the circumstances. So I thought they played pretty decently as well. One person, real quick before we move on to listener questions, is Earl Edwards Jr. has been under a microscope since Matt Turner's injury. He looks like he's going to be filling in for Matt Turner until Matt Turner returns back, hopefully right after the international break. But I think, especially on the third goal, he didn't look that great. I thought he could have done better on the second goal as well. What were your thoughts on Earl Edwards Jr. performance this last night?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a player in, as you said, under the spotlight with how imperious Matt Turner was in the sticks last year. And I remember about half time, I made a note on Edwards saying he makes it look like there's not a lot of difference between him and Turner when it comes to ability. Then I almost regretted that when Salcedo scored the third goal in particular, which he certainly should have done better for. And can't remember who, but I saw someone tweet that with that goal could go his chance of being the long-term successor for Turner. And whilst I get the thinking behind it, I personally don't. I think it's a bit harsh. I think I wasn't able to watch the Dallas game here in England, but I thought in Portland he made some important stops. Obviously, in the RSL game, in the conditions, he played well. In the first leg, he was really good too. So I think whilst the Salcedo goal and arguably the second Dinenio goal he could have done better for, I think with hindsight, I think Edwards he's definitely exceeded my expectations, because after what I saw last season, I was expecting Brad Knighton to be the stand-in. So I've certainly been impressed with Edwards, even if he wasn't at his best last night.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I don't want to repeat it because I think you put it really, really well. But the only thing I'll add is that the third goal was so weird. I almost think he thought it was going to deflect off By, or I don't know. But it seemed like he was not expecting the shot at all. And so, I think he could have done a lot better on it. But, I don't want that one moment to really take away from everything he's done. And as you said, he did have a great first half. He did make 8 saves in this game. And it seems like he was tested really, really early. He wasn't allowing too many rebounds. There was one rebound he gave up. It was a really, really juicy rebound. I forget who it was from Pumas, but they ran in between DeJuan Jones, who was out on the near the sideline a little bit, and they beat John Bell kind of in the box, and he took a shot to Earl Edwards' right, and Earl Edwards punched it away, and it went right through the box, and I think Polster was the one who kind of gathered it outside and cleared it. But outside of that rebound, he really didn't give up a ton. So, I thought Earl Edwards started this game out great, and I don't know if it was a confidence issue. I don't know if, it was just the By thing was just fluky, and he just wasn't expecting it to come right at him, but I think the night ended kind of on a sour note for him, and I'm curious to see how he plays this weekend against Charlotte, maybe a little bit of an easier opponent, because between RSL and Pumas, these games have ended quite rough for the Revs and Pumas, between RSL and Pumas, it's ended quite poorly for the Revs. So curious to see how he rebounds, and I'm curious to see, if he's the number 2 going forward, or if Brad Knighton, who I think came into the season as the number 2, is going to be in the 18 when Matt Turner returns. So it'll be interesting to see. Before we get to listener questions, I wanted to take a minute to talk about our sponsor, Golasso Kits. Golasso Kits' mission is to bring unique vintage jerseys to your home with a catalog of jerseys, scarves, jackets, and more from clubs and national teams from over 80 countries in the world. Do you need some United States men's national team merch for the upcoming international break? Want to support your favorite European team? Do you want a Pumas kit to burn in a futile effort to make you feel better about the Revolution's awful performance in the Champions League? If you said yes to any of these questions, Golasso Kits is the place for you. And if you're not sure what you want, you can check out their mystery kit package where you can enter in the size and style of jersey you like, and Golasso will surprise you with the kit of your dreams. So check out GolassoKits.com for their full selection, and make sure you follow them at Golasso Kits on Twitter and Golasso Kits on Instagram for updates to their new inventory every single week. And when you find something you like, please use promo code REVSRECAP to save 15% off your order. That is promo code REVSRECAP at GolassoKits.com for 15% off your order. Links and code are in the show notes. Jamie, you ready for some listener questions?
Yeah, let's get into it. Let's see how negative they're going to be.
I actually started with the most negative questions. I figured we wanted to get the pain out of the way. Where this is, you got to jump into the deep end and kind of swim your way back to shallow water. So this one, I don't think we're going to have a deep answer here, but we got two questions. By far the most depressing. Count Broloff says, "Why do I do this to myself every year? It's suffering being a Revs fan. Suffering." And John Pilkington also asks, "When does the pain end?" I think these are some rhetorical questions, but I think that this was probably the most painful loss. I thought it was more painful than the New York City FC loss last year. I think this has been the most painful loss they've had in a while. On a scale of 1 to 10, Jamie, how would you rate this on the pain meter? I've got this around a 9.
Yeah, I'd say you'd be able to speak to it better because you've obviously been covering the Revolution longer, whereas last season, the successful season, was my first proper year covering them. But I'd have to go 9.5. It really wasn't good, especially when the second goal went in. There was just that air of inevitability that a third was going to come, and at one point, I didn't think it would even reach extra time. I was waiting for them to put it to bed in normal time.
I was going to say, actually, you bring up a good point, because I was going to say that early on. I thought when the second and the third goal were scored like 10 minutes apart, and I had that exact same thought too, where I was like, this isn't even going to this is just a moment, 4 or 5 minutes from now, they're going to score. And I will say the Revs did show a little bit of fight. They did kind of push up a little bit. They did show a little bit of energy in going forward and getting some chances. And they had that Omar Gonzalez chance at the end. So, and I think Bruce said that last night, that even late in the game, they were still in it. So they could have packed it in and they could have stuck their tail between their legs, but they didn't. So, but they did fight. They did force penalties. So there is a small sliver of positivity we got there. But another thing too, if we want to go negative, I thought after the first 30 minutes, I thought we were golden. And I know even at halftime when it was 1-0, I thought the Revs were holding them pretty well, but it just kind of unraveled in that first 15 minutes coming out of the half. So that was a painful one. We did get one more comment too, where someone said, Trey said, "I've never genuinely been this mad after a soccer game before. It just broke my remote." That was a painful loss. The Revs were minus 2,000 to advance going into that game. So the odds were very strong. I think that's like a 90% chance of moving on. So John Pilkington did also ask us, have you ever been less confident in a team going into penalties? I don't think I ever have. I thought I figured it was over, but as I say, at least they forced penalties. Am I right, Jamie? Did you have any thought that the Revs could pull out penalties? Did you think that was going to happen, or did you just know where this game was going?
It might have been my naivety, Greg, to be honest, but I was genuinely confident. I was looking around thinking, you've got Heel, you've got Josie, I didn't know about Buksa's penalty pass, but I was thinking he's surely going to take one. You've got even Ajer, I thought would have taken one and scored. So when you had Jones too, I was quietly confident, but it came back to bite me clearly.
Yeah, you haven't. You clearly have not followed the Revolution long enough. It just always seems to go the wrong way when we need it the most. Gustavo Lopez, who you should follow on Twitter, covers the team as well. He says, "Why didn't the Revs need to score goals?" And this is alluding to a comment Bruce Arena made before the game, where he said it was in his midweek press conference. He said we don't need to score goals, we need to defend goals. And obviously, he would have taken a away goal if they had gotten it. And I think playing Buksa and Bo and Heel and playing the same formation kind of shows he did kind of want an away goal, which would have made last night a lot easier. But I think that comment came back to hurt him. Jamie, what were your thoughts on Bruce's comments? And do you think they played it a little too? I know we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but do you think Bruce should have been a little bit more aggressive in his tactics?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because if you told me once the game was over, the Revs had conceded 3 goals at normal time, I would have thought, oh, okay, we're great, we're through, because surely someone scored with that amount of talent on the pitch, but it wasn't meant to be. And I think it was Sam Minton, the very first question of the press conference, asked if Bruce stood by that, and he thought he'd had the correct tactical approach, and his one-word answer was yes, he stuck by it. But whether that's to save face or not, I'm not sure, because yeah, there wasn't enough in there. And I agree with those players on the pitch. There should have been a goal in there somewhere, and there was the chances, whether it would be Bo or Buksa or, as you said, Gonzalez at the end. But yeah, you just have to wonder whether it was a mistake on Bruce's part with the defensive setup.
And you know what? If Adam Buksa finishes either of those chances we talked about, the volley in that first half, or that ball that McNamara stole in the second half, I believe it was McNamara. I'm gonna get a lot of angry Twitter comments if it wasn't McNamara. But yeah, if Buksa can finish either of those chances, we're not talking about Bruce Arena's tactics. But I almost feel like he kind of split the baby, where he threw out his best lineup and kind of assumed they'd get a goal somewhere down the line, but he wanted to play back a little bit and play a little more defensively. And I almost wish they had played, maybe keep Bo on the bench for 45 minutes and then bring him out and, maybe kind of park the bus for the first half and see how long you keep him off the board. I don't know. I feel like they kind of split the baby a little bit, where they weren't aggressive enough, but they did play a little more conservative, I'll say. And I don't know. It just didn't work out for me. And really the only result that would have came back to bite them happened. So, yeah, not great. And I think Bruce, that comment is saving face a little bit. I think if we played this game again, we'd see some changes in his tactics there. Tom asks us, am I the only one not surprised by this result after seeing how the Revs were playing? And I assume this is referring to the first half in the RSL game, which, again, ended on a sour note. I got to admit, I was surprised. I think RSL we can kind of throw in the trash as kind of a fluke with the snow and the rotation. And those games happen from time to time. I know I ranted about it on Saturday, and I think those 3 points hurt. But I don't think they carried this game over. And so I kind of thought they'd be able to see this one out. So going into this game, I was surprised. I'm not surprised to see Pumas win. I actually thought Pumas was going to win. Maybe 1-0 or 2-1 or something like that. But I did not expect to be doing this podcast talking about the Revs being knocked out of CCL. Jamie, what are your thoughts? How surprised are you on this result?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. If you'd said before the game that Pumas would have won, yep, hands up, fair enough. But to not go through was almost a bit of a crime. And there's a lot of talk on social media before the game about Andrew Farrell's presence in the game, and then out of nowhere he's not even travelled. And then even with that centre-back partnership, I don't want to keep going on about it, but even seeing Bell and Gonzalez on the team sheet, you still would have liked to think all the Revs need to do is score 1, and then Pumas would have had to score 5, I think. So, yeah, it's just, I don't want to be too negative, but it's just a shock that we're sat here talking in a negative light about Champions League exit when it's such a golden opportunity in the quarterfinals.
When you agreed to come on this podcast, you thought it was going to be fun and positive, and we were going to talk about Cruz Azul. Nope. You're coming on a pretty dark day. But yeah, no, I agree with everything you said there. And I will say too, the Farrell news. I know I don't want to hammer this too much. I mean, I think a lot of people would have been very concerned. I think that's the key. If you told me going into this game, Andrew Farrell is not traveling with the team, and he's out for a week or two or whatever, and he's not going to play in this second leg, then I might have been a lot more concerned about the Revs not being able to hold a 3-goal lead. Not that I think John Bell and Omar Gonzalez are, horrific players that, can't play soccer, but I think Andrew Farrell's importance is it showed last night. I think a lot of people underrate him, and yeah, anyway. Moving on. Eric asks us, early in the first half, Bo put a ball across the face of goal. It was the third or fourth time in the past few matches he's done that, and there's been no one in the area. Trying to decide if that is a worrisome trend or just a few misconnects. That's a good question. I do remember, and not just Bo, I think DeJuan Jones had another play where he kind of threw it in front of goal and no one was there. I think that's a little concerning, but I think I'm willing to give last night a pass because I think they just weren't committing guys forward. It seemed like there were times, I don't know if people were winded or not, but there were some times where it just seemed like Bo or Buksa or Josie was a little bit behind the play than they normally are. Jamie, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I can't claim to be an expert, but I'm sure altitude does actually play some part. And I agree. Yeah, about 60 minutes, I saw a few players, especially Gustavo, with like his hands on his knees, like wheezing. So that was quite worrying. But I think it could. My interpretation, anyways, it speaks to Bruce's approach that there maybe wasn't that attacking impetus. So when someone like Bo got forward, there wasn't anyone there to support him because that was the way it was set out to be. But you'd like to think at least once if Books is there or vice versa, then there's that all-important goal. So yeah, hopefully it's nothing worrying going forward, but you never know.
Yeah, and Bo seemed a couple times too. This is a different topic, but there were a couple of plays where I thought Bo, his decision-making was not the best. There was one play early in the first half where DeJuan Jones intercepted the pass, and he kind of moved it to Bo, who was on the left, and Bo kind of dribbled it around. DeJuan Jones called for it in the corner, and Bo instead kind of dribbled to the middle and took a long shot that was saved. And then there was another counter where I think Carlos Hill was wide open on the right wing. I mean, the ball was at midfield. Carlos Hill kind of ran up, and Buksa kind of loses the ball, but Bo ends up getting it, and he kind of runs a little bit, and he kind of cuts to the center, and Carlos Hill is wide open with acres of space, and Bo just kind of scuffs the shot and kind of goes right to the defender. So there were a couple of plays last night, too, where Bo just seemed a little bit off. So maybe it's not necessarily people aren't there. Maybe Bo's just on a little bit of a different page right now. He is kind of a luxury roaming player a little bit, but I don't know. I don't know. It might be a worrisome trend, but the jury's still out. I still think, it's only 2 losses. Let's see how we do against Charlotte. If we lose against Charlotte, I think it's a much more worrisome trend. So Eric also says, I'm not as down on Omar as some, but I do feel like he took a goal off Buksa's head when Leggett got that chip off late in the second. He's talking about the play where the Revs almost scored. It was saved nicely by their keeper. Omar was right in front of Adam Buksa, but I think he's got to go for goal there, and he still did put a good chance on net. That was arguably the Revs' best chance of the night, and I don't think he can really rely on Adam Buksa. In the heat of the moment, I think if Adam Buksa was just not in as good a position, maybe it's not as clean. I think it was a pretty good look overall, and so I think if you're Omar Gonzalez, you got to take that. Jamie, any thoughts on that play?
Not a whole lot to add, but just, I think Talavera did make a good stop there. And I think the bringing in of Omar, from Bruce's perspective, I imagine it wasn't planned that he would play this much straight away, especially when it's the back three almost is him and Bell as centre-backs with Edwards in goal. That's 2 inexperienced players and a new signing as well. So this wasn't expected at all. So I think Gonzalez, especially in the changing room, I imagine Gonzalez will be a good player to have going forward. But just maybe they weren't expecting when bringing him in that he would be thrust into the limelight this quickly.
Yeah, I think that this game plays out a lot differently if Henry Kessler's there. And we did get a question from P-Mart who says, why/how is Omar still in this league and on this team? I'm not as harsh on that. I think Omar Gonzalez is a fine third center back. But as I say, I think he's been thrust into the starting lineup. And, as I say, I think he just doesn't move that well. And when you don't have someone who can kind of recover for you like an Andrew Farrell, that's not going to end well. So I think, as I say, I think Omar Gonzalez's weaknesses really showed up, and that was just kind of the situation. So I think, he's still a veteran center back. I still think he's got a lot of leadership qualities in him that you could kind of use as a reserve player. But the Revs are really relying on him right now. And sometimes he puts in some decent performances, but last night I think it was just a situation doomed to fail where, Pumas was going to apply pressure all night, and it was just a matter of time before it broke. So it is what it is. Carter says, sell Adam Buksa and get someone who can run faster than a 2-year-old. Edwards is a journeyman third stringer for a reason. That guy had one good game, and I'm not going to repeat any expletives. This is a family show. And why did our bench look like a D2 college team, and why did our starters play like it? A lot of negatives there. We also got. I'm gonna move on to the next question because this is kind of in the same vein. But Teal Forever says if your DP can't hit the net on a good cross when he's wide open and isn't you're in your top 5 for penalty kicks, you might as well sell him, right? So I think a lot of, we talked about Adam Buksa's struggles. Obviously, a lot of people are going to be negative on him. I will add the context that Buksa was one of the better players against RSL last week, I would say. And I think he's been playing pretty decently. So I think obviously some negativity is going to come out. But I think on the whole, this is just going to go down as one of his worst performances for the Revs, and I think long term the Revs are still going to sell him for a pretty penny come the summer. Jamie, any final thoughts here on Adam Buksa before we move on from these super negative comments?
Yeah, they are. They're getting quite damning, aren't they? But no, yeah, I think as you say, like against RSL, he was one of the better players. And see, for example, last season you had Tati Castellanos leading the league in goals, and he's still a fairly wasteful forward, and maybe Buksa can be every now and then. But I think for this team anyway, he is more often than not he does get the job done. So I don't think this one poor evening down in Mexico is enough to write off his whole career with the club.
Yeah, and sometimes he botches it, and it is a problem, and it showed. But again, his strengths are kind of being physical and brutal in the box and winning crosses, and the Revs didn't really, get the ball into the attacking third that much, and they weren't able to, swing it into some crowded areas that Buksa can kind of win headers on. So I think, similar to Omar Gonzalez, this game kind of played to Adam Buksa's weaknesses, which is playing it in space, getting out into open space, finding some good runs, and yeah, I don't know. I wish he'd finish one of those chances, because we'd be talking about how he scored 3 goals over these 2 legs. But it's not meant to be. We did get another question from Teal Forever. How much do they miss Andrew Farrell? And center back has to be improved this summer, right? Well, they certainly missed Andrew Farrell. I think that was pretty obvious to everyone. In terms of center back improving over this summer, I'm curious to see what they do, because they do have Henry Kessler and Andrew Farrell. I think when everyone's healthy, this unit might be fine, but I don't know. I could certainly see the argument of going out and adding another addition. You could always use another defender. Jamie, what are your thoughts about potentially adding a center back in the summer window?
I think, yeah, as you said, when it's full strength, you have a back 4 of Bai, Kessler, Farrell, and Jones. Without being biased, that far and away is one of the best the league has to offer. And then with the experience of Omar on the bench, plus Bell, who I think is about 24, so. He's got a lot of good characters there to learn from. I think, yeah, as you say, bring in another defender that's MLS quality, please do. No one's going to complain. But when Farrell and Kessler are both fit and ready to go, they are one of the best centre-back partnerships in the league.
Yeah, it's a little concerning that they both have had, I believe Farrell has a lower body injury. I think it was defined as soreness, so the details are still out. And Henry Kessler has a hamstring injury that he nursed in preseason, thought he was good, and then re-aggravated it. So I'm curious to see the timelines and if that is a nagging problem going forward. And Andrew Farrell is a guy that plays a ton. He really rarely misses games. Even before this, I went back to see if he's ever even really been hurt. He had an eye injury coming into, I think it was 2019, but for the most part, he's played 25 to 30 games since he was drafted in 2013. But he is getting to 30 years old. And I look at the rest of the center backs. You have John Bell, you have Henry Kessler, you have Omar Gonzalez. I think Henry Kessler, is a little quick. But I think that if you end up in a scenario where you're playing 3 or 4 games with Omar Gonzalez and John Bell, I'm not so sure about it. I almost wish they had played AJ De La Garza, where Andrew Farrell played last night, although he's not the tallest center back in the world. So I don't know. I'm curious to see what they end up doing if they end up going get another depth center back. There also are a few decent center backs down at Revs 2. So maybe if some injuries last longer than expected, maybe there's someone at Revs 2 that they can kind of bring up. So, and maybe play over John Bell. That's something that maybe you can kind of fix in-house. If Henry Kessler is out long term, I think center back is up there in terms of the want list. Matthew Skillen says, did Bruce botch the rotation this past week? Not having Farrell there tonight was crucial. And we talked about Farrell a little bit too. I don't want to say he botched the rotation that much because he rested pretty much everyone. But yeah, obviously one guy he really didn't rest, and he played a full 90 minutes against RSL. The one starter he played against RSL is now out with an injury. Any thoughts on the rotation and how Bruce handled it? I personally don't have an issue with it, Jamie, but I want your thoughts.
Yeah, I do think that it does need to be discussed, whether you look at the substitutions in game. Maybe you think, I saw a lot of people saying on Twitter, and I was in full agreement, that someone like Emma Boateng to stretch their defenders was needed, because Buksa was getting asked to run in behind a couple of times, and that's just not necessarily his strongest point. And I do wonder whether the rotation was managed in the right way, and whether Bruce is it's an off week. And funny, we beat Pumas 3-0 last week, so it's not all doom and gloom, but I do wonder whether there is something going on there.
We got another question here from Matt. He says, why no midfield sub to inject some speed and fresh legs in the game? And we did get another question from someone who, what now really on Twitter. He says, why wasn't Boateng brought in? Which is what I was surprised about. I thought that Boateng would have been great for this game. I don't know if he's nursing an injury or something, or if they just wanted to rest him. I don't know. But I thought they were kind of lacking some speed. They had some tired legs. And originally it looked like Sebastian Lletget was coming out for Josie Altidore. I guess Bo picked up a knock, and so they wanted to take off Gustavo Bo. So they were going to go with Bo, Buksa, and Josie Altidore, which I thought would not have been the fastest trio. I think I ranted about that a few podcasts ago, and I'm not in love with that trio up top when you're trying to protect the lead. So I thought they definitely could have used some fresh legs. I definitely could have thought they could have used another body in the midfield, especially when they were trying to protect the league. No Maciel, no Emma Boateng, and Bruce ends up, I believe, burning. I think he made 2 subs last night, if I remember that correctly. No, he brought in Tommy McNamara, he brought in Altidore. So Boateng wasn't used, Maciel wasn't used, and then AJ De La Garza and Ryan Spalding weren't used, which you kind of expected. But what are your thoughts about him not bringing in those midfield subs? I personally think that was a giant mistake. I definitely think not using Maciel was a mistake. Maybe I would have liked to have seen Maciel instead of Tommy McNamara. But what are your thoughts on Bruce's subs last night?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because especially in this league, someone like Sebastian Lletget, I'm a huge fan of for this standard anyway. And yeah, McNamara wasn't hugely impressive. For Matt Polster was, I wouldn't want to tear him to shreds, but I think maybe as the deeper midfielder, there's a job there for him to go in and help the 2 centre backs. But obviously that's something we don't know about. But I think there was some question marks with Bruce only using the 2 subs. It did seem quite strange. He almost was sticking to what he'd gone with originally. And recently, just before I came on, I was listening to the Call Up podcast, and Claudio Reyna was on there, who's worked with Bruce before. And one quote stood out to me straight away. He just said he's so simple in his approach, and whilst he used it in a positive context, I do wonder whether Bruce's simplicity and desire to stick to the original 11 in some games can be his undoing in this league.
I agree completely, and I'm going to make a college basketball comparison because today is the start of March Madness. So I don't know if you'll get this reference, Jamie, but my school, we had a coach who really played his top 5 players, and they'd play, it's a 40-minute game. He'd play them 30 to 35 minutes, pretty much the whole game, and bring in 1 or 2 other players, and they'd play like 5 or 10 minutes. And there was a talent gap between the starters and the bench. But what ended up happening year after year is we lose games towards the end just because legs were tired, and everyone has their habits and all that. So teams knew how this guy played and how this guy approached it and all that. And so I think rotation is important. This kind of goes with the RSL question, I guess, a little bit too. But I think developing depth and developing rotation and using players off the bench in spots they can succeed, I think that's important to managing a roster and managing games. Whereas I think Bruce Arena's approach is, here's the best 11 guys, hopefully our best 11 beats their best 11. And I don't know if that's the best approach, and I'm still not sure too. We're going to talk about Josie Altidore in a minute. I still don't know the best way to use Josie Altidore, because in my mind, Josie Altidore is a replacement for Adam Buksa. I think having them both on the field at the same time, maybe I'm alone in this, I don't like that pairing together. And he at least played Altidore up top today. He didn't play him where Leggett usually plays in the midfield, so I was happy to see that. But I don't know. It seems like they're just putting in Josie Altidore to take over for Gustavo Bo because he's Josie Altidore. But that game, as I say, that game could have used Emma Boateng last night. But I guess he didn't want to take off Leggett because I think that's a downgrade from Leggett. And you'd have to move McNamara to the right. He already put on Tommy McNamara. I don't know. I'm just confused to why Altidore and Buksa, had to be on the field instead of, maybe going with a 4-2-3-1 and having bodies kind of occupy the wings a little bit. Because it just seemed like they're, putting the pieces, and sometimes it's a square peg in a round hole. So, anyway, I don't mean to rant too much, but your comment there from the call-up kind of went down this path of, I think, I don't know. I don't know if Bruce is using his players in the best scenarios, and I don't know. It's driving me nuts. Gordon asked us, why do you all think we went into penalties without making all of our changes? Nobody was ready to change the game, or was I missing something? We already kind of talked about the subs. We already talked about Boateng, so I'll skip over that one. Sorry, Gordon. Didn't realize that was all related. Oscar asks us, is Josie Altidore a bust? I know it's early in the season, but so far from what I've seen from him is not much there. Seems like Arena is not good at making off-season signings. And I will also add that I criticized Buksa a couple episodes ago, and our listeners were not happy with me. So I'm going to be very careful with my words. But I'll take this one first. I don't think he's a bust. I still think we're at a small sample size. And I kind of just talked about it. I don't know if Josie Altidore was being played at his best positions. But he did score against RSL. He did have a nice pass in the first leg in the Pumas game that helped set up that third goal. We're seeing bits of flashes, but there's also times it just seems like he's isolated. I think he had 12 touches in 20 minutes last night. There are times he doesn't seem to add much, and it seems like he's playing a lot when the Revs are up a goal or they're trying to kind of not concede. And that's not really that's not really when you want Josie Altidore on the field. You want him to get you a goal, not defend against one. So any thoughts on that, Jamie, before we move on? Any thoughts on Josie Altidore and how he's playing so far?
I think it is related. You've mentioned about, Bruce's off-season signings, and before the season started, I was constantly writing out Omar, Seba Leggett, and Josie are three. They're winners. They're experienced players in this league. That's great for the dressing room, but then I maybe didn't take into account the on-the-field stuff. And whilst Leggett got 2 goals, Josie scored, and it is still very early. I am starting to wonder where this all fits, as in it's hard to replace a player as good and as electric as Tajon Buchanan, but his outlet is being missed dramatically, I think, and there doesn't really seem to be an answer to it at the moment.
No, I agree with you 100%. And it's worth noting that if this off-season crop doesn't work out, this is 2 consecutive off seasons where the Revs have a really, really good window and the signings all miss. I still think the jury is out on Tristison. I think Tristison played pretty well last night, and he's put in some good performances. Maybe we're going to see kind of a second-year bounce back. But Christian Mafla is already gone. He did not work out. Wilfred Captain didn't even make the 18 yesterday, which I thought was pretty surprising, although it's not surprised they didn't get in the game. But he seems to have fallen out of favor, which is not good when you're paying someone $500,000. So, if Josie and Omar Gonzalez and Leggett all turn out to be not great and don't help take this team to the next level, we're going to look back on this window and say that these off-season moves really wasted it. But as I say, I think I'm willing to give a lot more time on Josie Altidore. I think he's still building up his fitness. I also am curious to see how the Revs, if they sell Buksa, how do they manage it? Does Josie take over for Buksa? Are they able to use a designated player spot in the midfield? I mean, maybe in theory that could work out. So I'm willing to see it play out. And I think Leggett has been fine. I think he's been a good addition so far. He's just not Tajon Buchanan. I think that's where people kind of hold it against him. So Bobby Reverton says, maybe this is too big of a question. How do you build balance in MLS? We are very top-heavy, but it feels like there's no spine to the team, no way to carry the ball from goalie to striker without Heel walking it up himself. The ball dies in the middle third. I agree with all of that. Really, if this is an MLS question, I think the issue is just you got to get rid of the salary cap rules. In Liga MX, they are able to spend whatever they want on players, and they're able to spend on quality at all positions. Whereas when you're in a salary cap league, you're going to end up with Omar Gonzalez and John Bell as your center back pairing. You're not going to be able to go out and buy, plug holes and spend as much money as you want. You're going to have to, develop young talent and find some cheap pieces, which the Revs have been able to do. But it also leads to, as I say, John Bell and Omar Gonzalez and Tommy McNamara, trying to conserve a lead in Mexico City. So, Jamie, anything to add on that about what MLS can do to build a better balance?
Yeah, I think as you said, the salary cap issues is always gonna limit teams trying to get to that next level and become a continental success as opposed to just a league success. And yeah, I think we have seen that Bai and Jones can both progress the ball very well. So I think if those two and Leggett and Heel can build a good relationship over the next month or two, then I think there definitely will be some success going forward. But as you mentioned, I think I just miss Tejan Buchanan. I can't lie, he's such a good player, and he is such a multifaceted game that it's just not having Tejan in this team has been upsetting. I can't lie.
I do think Leggett has been a great addition to this team, but there are times where Tejan would go out and change the game with an amazing play, and they seem to be missing that kind of X factor. DeJuan Jones, I guess, has been kind of the X factor on the left wing a little bit, but when he's forced to stay back, they seem to be lacking that explosiveness, as Bobby said. Sam Minton says, should the backline be a priority in the summer transfer window? We already answered that one. I would say yes, especially if the injuries to Kessler and Farrell are longer term than we expect. David Sibilian says, announce Horvath is my question and comment, which I don't think is happening. It seems like he's taken over the starting role at Nottingham Forest, and it would be a pretty pricey signing anyway. So I think that one you can kind of scrap. It is kind of interesting to see what the Revs do with the goalkeeper position, because I don't think Earl Edwards Jr. is the answer. And the fact that Edwards is still playing over Knighton, maybe Knighton gets the start against Charlotte, but I don't know if they're going to go with Knighton either, with Edwards getting all this time. So I think they are going to have to go out and make an acquisition, but I don't think it's going to be Horvath. What Now Really says, is Turner expected to play for the Revs again before leaving? There was a rumor, Jamie, I got to go through this real quick for the people that weren't on Twitter, but there was a story this week that said Matt Turner got frostbite in the Minnesota United States men's national team game, and that is not true at all. So I think there are some people that are worried the Matt Turner injury is a lot worse than expected, but it is just a break or a fracture in his foot, according to Tom Quinlan of New England Soccer Weekly, and his timeline is expected to be right after the international break. I don't know if that's the first game after the international break, but it is a short-term injury. I think a lot of people were worried Matt Turner is never to be seen again, but that is not correct. So just wanted to throw that out there. Jamie, here I got a question for you here. Randy says, we've lost 2 in a row now. Brad Friedel said good teams don't do that. Was he right? So quick question. Do good teams sometimes lose 2 games in a row, or are the Revs not that good of a team?
I think as you said, it's such a small sample size, and whilst a lot of the squad is still in place from last year's success, I think you can't make a comment like that, because it's not 2 games, just normal games. As much as I hate the excuses, one's a snow game against RSL, one's a second leg of a CCL quarterfinal, which is newfound territory for the Revs. So I think I don't want to overreact and say there's an issue there. If we end up conceding 3 more goals against Charlotte on the weekend, then maybe raise a few eyebrows. But I think a good result against Charlotte and get into the international break and get Kessler and Farrell back, and I think we'll go back to being pretty happy fans again.
Yeah, I think once we get back to full strength, we're not going to be conceding 3 goals in a row like we have in back-to-back games here. So Oscar asks us, should we be waiting for the Revs in the parking lot now that they've lost 2 in a row, which is another reference to Brad Friedel. I think the Brad Friedel references are coming out because Brad Friedel recently did an interview where he, I don't want to get too much into it because I'm kind of tired of talking about Brad Friedel, but he kind of came out and made a lot of comments about the former players and how he was basically set up to fail with the Revolution and kind of more Brad Friedeling. So I don't want to talk about it too much. I didn't listen to the episode. I'm not giving Brad Friedel the time of day anymore. But I think that is why we were getting the Brad Friedel references here. And also, this might be the most miserable the fan base has been since the Brad Friedel days, to be quite honest with you. So Paulo says, just hope this hardens our resolve and we're on to Charlotte. So he's moving on to the next game, hoping to get 3 points before we head into the international break. And boy, would it be a disaster if we do not win. Maybe if we lose, it'll be a catastrophe, a complete mess. But if we draw against Charlotte, I can't imagine people are going to be very helpful either. So Charlotte, I feel, is a very important 3 points. But yeah, so that does it for Twitter questions, Twitter comments, a lot of misery, not fun, not great. But we got through it, Jamie, and I'm really excited. Anything you want to say before we depart here today?
No, I think we covered a lot of it, and yeah, as you said, it's I understand the fury and the negativity from the fans and us as well. We're not best pleased with what went down last night. But I think no, more in general, it's that it should be brighter times to come with hopefully a win against Charlotte and into the international break.
Yeah, it's a big game coming up, and just not. We'll have to get you on for a happier occasion, Jamie. As I say, I feel like we've thrown you into the deep end here. But Jamie, as you mentioned, you covered the Revs last year, covering the Revs this year. For our listeners who are unfamiliar with you, please let us know where they can follow you on social media and where they can find your work.
So first of all, I just want to say thank you again, Greg, for having me on. Big fan. And so I write for Last Word on Soccer, which the Twitter is at Last Word SC, or if you want, which they cover the whole league, or if you want just my coverage of the Revs, you can find me at RookieJNR13 on Twitter.
For our listeners, you can follow us on Twitter at Revolution Recap, and please follow our Revolution Recap Instagram and Facebook pages. If you'd like to support the podcast further, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Revolution Recap, which is also in the show notes. And please be sure to subscribe to iTunes, Spotify, wherever you're listening. If you don't want to contribute to our Patreon, you can always rate and review us 5 stars or tell a friend about our podcast here. Help people who are looking for Revolution content find it. Please also be sure to follow the Bent Musket on Twitter at the Bent Musket, our friends over there, and follow their work online at www.thebentmusket.com for year-round coverage. And also, of course, check out our sponsor Galasso Kits and use our promo code RevsRecap for 15% off your order on any of their merchandise that they have in their catalog. So we will be back this weekend against Charlotte. I'm not going to be here. Chris is going to be covering. If we lose, if they lose, you're going to be very happy I'm not on the podcast because I would be losing my mind. But Chris will be covering this game in Charlotte, which God willing will be a win and 3 points, and all will be right in the world. So until then, until this weekend, thank you everyone for listening, and go Revs.